So, Rob, the one other thing you wanted to chat about was an ambush that took place near Mapai from South African territory. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, okay, Tony, that was I had to go back to try and figure out a timeline when it was. But I think it was early 78 before the squadron became a regiment, which was in June of 78, because we deployed with Captain Frank Hales. And Frank was sent to take over Para School, I think, when Cock moved on. But it was early 78, I'd say about sort of maybe March, April 78. We were all based down there in the Lowveld at Mabalauta. And we made up a stick. Captain Hales got three of us. We drove back to Buffalo Range, which was, that's almost half a day or a day's journey. And from there, we flew by deck to Byte Bridge. And at Byte Bridge, some Zulu scouts picked us up. They took us to their fort. That's the first time I actually met Major Bert Sachs. Remember, he'd been in the squadron early days, in the Macombi days. And he actually remembered my brother Colin from Macombi. And I met the guy, very, very affable officer. And it was weird, 5 years later in the SADF, when after Dave Berry was killed, we went to Palaboa. And 5 years later, and Sachs remembered my name. So it seems like he had a good memory for names.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went to the Scouts Fort, and they were met by some South African intelligence guys. In those days, they were known as BOSS, the Bureau of State Security. And they had one of those black panel vans. I think they used to call them a Black Mariah. So we piled in with our packs, which were heavy because we were loaded with a few mines. And they drove us from the fort on the Rhodesian side across the border. No customs, the fastest I've ever been across the border, apart from flying. So, booms were up both sides. We just screamed across it, and they drove us then down towards Chappice and then eastwards to the Kruger Park in the back of that van, and it was stifling. It was nasty. But we stopped as we got into the park at Crook's Corner, there was a lay-by, so we stopped and they gave us some samis and tea or whatever. I can't remember if we had cold drinks. And then from there, we raced down to Shingwedzi. Now, that's the fastest I've ever driven in the Kruger Park, because there your speed limit's 50 k's an hour. I think we were probably doing more than double that, but we drove down past Shingwedzi camp and then along the Shingwedzi River to the Mozambique border, which wasn't far away from Shingwedzi camp. And we got to the international fence there. There was this big elephant-proof fence. All the poles are old railway tracks. And I do remember now we had to scale this fence because they weren't going to cut it. We had to climb it with their assistance. But getting our heavy packs over was that was a mission. I can't remember who the other guys were. The boss was Captain Hales, and I think Jan Marks, because Jan had the RPG-7, which he was supposed to initiate with. And I can't remember the fourth guy. But as we got over the fence and the South Africans moved away, we just sat a while and let the noise of the vehicle go, and then we listened to, because the track was only about 30 meters from the border fence. It was headed up towards Pafuri and the South African border post with Mozambique. So we sat there, and then we moved to the road. It was close. I said 30, maybe 40 meters away. And there I laid my first mine, but it was one of those plastic chocolate cakes. It was a record. I think I laid that mine in 6 minutes. It was just sand. We didn't have to dig. All I had to do was scrape it with my hands. And it was such deep sand that we put it in there, and I covered up as best as I could. And then we started heading due east, right across, heading towards Mapai. That track came up the South African border fence, and then before Pafuri, it turned around in a big loop, and then went through the bush down to Mapai. Basically, the early Mapai was on the river. Now it's on the railway line, but it could have been Mapai or George Limpopo.
Before you go any further, Rob, regarding the laying of that mine, did that have to be registered with ComOps? Because what happens, on quite a few occasions, territorial battalions like 2RR that I was in, we would go and do ops in Mozambique, and there might be a chance we blown up our own mines. How was there a liaison with you guys and other forces?
Tony, I wouldn't even know. I mean, we just sowed mines all over the place. So maybe you'd have to ask one of the officers, but those guys have largely disappeared.
Yeah.
But no, I wasn't aware of that because, okay, we obviously had, we were very good at map reading and our lock stats. We could give them, but only a 6-figure. We couldn't give an 8-figure, especially down the Russian front. It's so flat. There's no high features.
Terrible place.
So anyway, we laid them on and then we started heading eastwards. But I do remember as we started off, there was a big anthill. There's lots of these big anthills. And there I saw the biggest Mfez, the Mozambique spitting cobra there. And but it ran away from us, went down into the anthill. But that thing was massive. But then we carried in, we slept the night, and I don't know how long it took, probably half of the next day to walk across that loop. I can only estimate the distances, probably in the region, maybe 40 Ks. But I can't remember how long we had to walk through that bush going east. But when we got to the road where we met it again, we actually RV'd with a course sign that had already been in country for quite a while. It was our Sergeant Bruce Fraser. Bruce's stick was there. So we tied up with them, and then we laid the ambush, and then I had to lay my second chocolate cake.
What was your mission? What was your mission, Rob?
No, it was to ambush this last track, because from the Limpopo up north to Gonorrhea, the SAS had closed up all the routes. We'd ambushed and mined virtually every route. So this one was apparently one that hadn't been touched, and they discovered, INT had found out they were moving up from Masangena, and they're coming along the South African border all the way up, and then they're looping back down to the river at Mapai.
Right.
So we had to ambush this one convoy. But as I said, it was so sandy. It wasn't as sandy here where I laid this one, but the wheel ruts were so deep. I mean, the ruts must have been 12, 18 inches deep, with a big middle monarchy in the middle, and we laid the mine. And it was just wasn't a command det, it was just pressure. And Jan Marks went just outside of the killing ground, and he's armed with his RPG-7 with instructions, he'd be ordered to fire if the mine didn't detonate. Well, as it turned out, I laid the mine, and these were the South African ones. I think it was 8 kgs of classic explosive in the SA mines. They were bigger than the Russian ones. And I tried to move away a safe distance, and Captain Hale stopped me. He says, "No, Riddell, you stay here." I said, "Sir, I'm too close. I'm in the blast area." And he wouldn't listen. He's an old soldier. I mean, he was in Aden in the early 60s.
Lord.
And I argued with him, and he ordered me. And I lay behind this tree, and because we heard the convoy coming, and I can only judge it. I was lying down on my stomach behind this tree, and I had my mouth open just to equalize the shock effect on your lungs. And I was lying there when the truck came over. I was looking through the corner of my face, and I was looking up at the top of the truck, and the tours were all sitting on top of the goods. It was packed above the level of the cab, but they were Russian gas trucks, which are, it's like a Unimog.
Yeah.
But they had very wide tires, and the wheel ruts were so deep that it didn't create enough pressure over the mine to crush it. And I lay there just waiting to feel what the effect of the shockwave would be with my mouth open. And I saw them, they're all sitting on top. They didn't even see us. I don't know how they didn't see us, but I mean, I couldn't have been more than maybe 20 meters away.
Yes.
And thank goodness it never crushed the mine. And now Jan was supposed to get the instruction from Captain Hales, and he froze. He didn't give the order to, because Jan had a small means, and he would have either clicked the pressure switch or just said to him, fire. And he didn't. And the whole convoy just trundled through our ambush, and we lay there, not a shot fired.
Oh.
I tell you what, Sergeant Bruce Fraser, he'd been in country a few weeks, and he was hot, thirsty, and he was livid with rage. Oh, he was so angry. And it was such a disappointment in that heat and the hulking and carrying and the way we were deployed. It came to absolutely zip.
How many vehicles were in that convoy?
I can't really recall how many it was. It was probably about maybe 3 or 4. I'm not too sure. But Tony, I'd be having a guess. But even Jan, who he was very experienced with initiating ambushes. I mean, he was a marksman with that RPG-7. He was good, but he just didn't get the go ahead. But Captain Hales, he was too old. He was past it. He shouldn't have been deployed operationally, sadly.
Mm.
But that wasn't good. And then I can't remember if we as well had to move away from the area, even though nothing had been initiated. I can't remember if it was the same op. It could have been a different one, but in the same area. We just didn't have water left. The guys were out of water, and it could have been that op. It could have been another one, but I can remember my tongue was swollen. And the guys were talking about the drip, which is Ringer's lactate. They were discussing, can we drink it? Is it going to affect us? And the old story about drinking pee came up. But I mean, our pee was virtually gone because we just had no liquid. And at night, you could hear the thunder in the distance. So psychosomatically, it just made it worse.
Well, myself and my platoon, we shared a drip or two once. We were so dry. And it's not bad, actually. It's got a nice salty flavor, and it does pick you up a bit.
Lactate.
Yeah.
But anyway, nighttime, we could hear the thunder, which made it worse. And then the next day, I think the day of our pickup, we actually found some elephant tracks full of this green slime.
Mm.
And then we thought, there's this old rainwater. We'll scrape off the green slime, which we did. And I put mine in my little fire bucket, and I boiled it for about 20-25 minutes on my little gas stove. And it stank. And Tony, elephants pee down their back legs. I think it wasn't water. I think it was elephant urine.
Yeah.
It stank to high heaven, and even after boiling it for just under half an hour, I was rummaging in my pack. The food was virtually gone, but right at the bottom, I found one old little packet of jungle juice. The old sugary orange drink.
Yeah.
And I took that out and I poured it into my fire bucket, and it pulled all the floating grass. Because elephants, there's always that grass and matter in their feces. And that pulled it down to the bottom, and I drank this thing after it cooled down, but I had to hold my nose. So look, I'm convinced it was actually elephant urine.
Yeah, I've been there, done that.
But I mean, Tony, none of us vomited, and none of us got sick afterwards. I think our immune systems were so strong.
Yeah. And your body craved that liquid like you can't believe.
Yeah, so we didn't even vomit, but drinking it was a mission. You're retching a bit, but just block your nose and swill it down. But that worked.
Mm.
But that was, I think, like I said, the timeline, I think, before C Squadron became a regiment. So it must have been about 5 months after that, we were deployed back to Zambia. And also with Frank Viviers, again, I said in the first talk, very, very good map reader. And we deployed in the same area of the old DK1 camp, which we'd hit about a year and a half earlier, I think it was. Or no, earlier that year. And we dropped in the same area, and we navigated at night. And Frank's map reading was so good, we actually hit that small little bend, that little oxbow in the river a second time at night. And those ops were about 6 months apart.
Quite a task to do that.
So Frank was an excellent map reader. But this was nighttime, and I just come off junior NCO's cadre. So on the first page of my little cadre book, there's a thing on anti-tracking, and it says, think outside the box, boots and then barefoot. And I said to the guys, hey, on cadre, they said we must try barefoot. So I talked to the guys and I said, look, instead of climbing out the escarpment, we can be visible from the village. Again, let's take off our boots and walk through the village along the road heading east. They agreed, and we took our boots off and we started walking along the sandy track. But I was not popular. It was all these little devil thorns in the sand.
Terrible.
The locals' feet probably wouldn't even feel those.
Yeah.
But us whiteys, us Mulungus with our soft little feet, boy, there was wincing and whimpering the whole way through. I was very, very unpopular.
They're horrible thorns. I mean, for our international viewers, they got a little hook like that, haven't they, Rob? And
but these were the little ones, like those ones you throw onto roads. There's always one thorn sticking up.
The spike, horrible.
So, that was agony. I mean, you're walking and you're standing, so you're scraping your feet. So I don't think we fooled anyone with that spoor.
All cussing in English, yeah.
But I mean, as we got out of the village towards the east, now this is winter time now. We put on our boots, and then we got into this riverine, and this big river came out of the escarpment. And I just put on my boots, and we stepping on rocks going across this. This is about 1 o'clock about midnight or 1 o'clock. And I just put on my boots, and I'm hopping from rock to rock, and I slipped into the freezing cold water. My pack, sleeping bag, everything sodden. Got out the other side, and we went up to the base of the escarpment, only a few hundred meters, and we just got a bit of shut-eye. And it's wintertime. I'm soaking wet. My sleeping bag is wet, and I'm lying there shivering it was unbelievable. That's when I learned with my mind. I forced myself to stop shivering, and I managed to just get maybe 5 or 10 minutes of sleep. But that was absolutely scary. It was so cold. But the next day we scaled the escarpment. We went to the same area where we'd OP'd for DK1, but more towards the east. And then we didn't see any sign of a camp. So Frank took us back onto the main escarpment, because these are all out on spurs. So we went back a few Ks and went along the whole ridge line of the escarpment, looking for a likely spot. And it was nighttime, and we got onto the spur, which he'd identified as a likely OP position. And quietly we went out on the spur. Now the escarpment there was hundreds of meters high. I mean, are we talking? Must be, I don't know, 600-700 meters high. And we found the spot in the dark, and it was this little spur, which very, very rocky. And he said to, okay, let's settle down here. So we found a spot between the rocks, and I sat down. There's nowhere to actually lie down. It was just too many rocks. So I sat against my pack, and with my left and right hand, I'm just moving rocks slowly, one by one, just to make a little place where I can lie down. And I dislodged a rock, and then I felt, what's this? And I was an empty tin. And then I dug away more, and there was an empty tin. We'd stumbled that night onto the same OP position the previous guys from B Troop had used.
Good Lord.
And, and instead of burying them deep, either you crush and put them in your pack, but we used to try and find holes like ant bear holes, and we buried our tins there. And where we sat down was the exact posse that the B Troop guys had used a couple of months earlier.
And what were you observing from there, Rob?
No, we were looking for DK3 camp.
All right.
DK1 had been hit by A Troop, DK2 had been hit by B Troop. And DK3, we discovered from the OP that they had learnt their lessons. They didn't form into a camp anymore. They used to gather at midday for a big communal meal. Once they've eaten their meal, they would bombshell in a 360 into the bush. So there was no camp we could actually hit. So, but Zipra, they were a lot more military minded. They were a lot more disciplined and better trained than Zanla.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So DK3 never happened, but there was a lot of activity, as I've said before, there from Samani Mine to Kabanga Mission. There was a lot of activity there. But that's basically all the memory banks that have opened up. That's I think is everything that I can recall.
Rob, just a couple of questions maybe. Out of Mozambique and Kariba, not Zambia and Mozambique, which did you prefer operating in, and why?
Oh, Zambia, much more. The escarpment rivers, we had water. There was always water. And there was a lot more activity. Russian front, I can remember, was flat, featureless, no water, and the mine-laying trips were just mind-numbingly boring.
And the mosquitoes.
Those mine-laying trips, yeah. Zambia, there was a lot more activity. Even when we helped that manager of Samani Mine out to be uplifted, Andy Schultz, being a farmer's son, he commandeered a tractor with a trailer, and we sat and we drove around the area on this on the tractor and trailer. And we actually found, likely spots down these re-entrants, and we found a cache of brand new black army boots. I've still got mine here, and I wore them in the squadron until the end. Excellent quality boots. And so there was always something happening around our theater of operations in Zambia. Russian front and op was the repulse. A lot of it was boring if you weren't in any contacts or ambushes. It was very, very boring in those mine-laying expeditions. But as I said, the squadron closed it down. We closed virtually every road and every approach road, so that they had to walk further and further. as all the attacks took place, they had to move. They had to walk from further back. They just
Then
couldn't risk traveling in vehicles.
Then they got into the mincing machine of the towards the end of the war of the Parabats, and one in-depth was extremely successful there. Lots of kills down there east of Bite Bridge. But yeah, like you said, a hell of a long walk.
Yeah. But that's basically it, Tony. That's I think most that I can recall. I just wish I'd been like some other guys that kept diaries of their time.
Yeah. No, well, it's been a superb talk. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to end recording here because otherwise we'll be having too many goodbyes.
But then I should have mentioned Tembwe, and I forgot. Tembwe, we dropped too far away. Chamoya, they were running underneath us. Tembwe, we were a bit too far. And I don't know if I mentioned in my first talk, I took off my chute, I had my rifle against a tree, and we could hear the K cars and RLI were hitting the camp we were supposed to be at. And next minute, there's this black guy comes running out the bush, and he's looking over his shoulder, and he turned around, he looked at me, and his face was just resignation. I felt sorry for him. I said, boy, you nearly got away. You nearly escaped, and I had to deal with him.
Yeah.
And then as we got to the river bank, it was quite a very high river bank with all these, the thickets of bush, the grevia bushes and everything, all these, what are they, jackalberry trees.
Yeah.
And we were looking through the bush. In those days, we could look through the bush. You can look at it, but you can see through it. And we're looking through at the camp, and there's a big river full of reeds, which when we went down, we actually took fire from within the reeds. They were hiding in the reeds. But we're on top of and we're looking at the camp, and RLI had swept through it. Now we're still on the top of this riverbank, very high up. And there's all this, there's a shirt, and there's a pants, and there's a sock, and there's underpants. There's like a trail. And I'm looking over the riverbank, and I just seen all this trail of clothing, and I was by a big bush, like a grevia bush. And I looked down at my feet, and there, this fellow, he'd taken off all his kit, and he was hiding. He'd put leaves over himself like a puff adder, like a gaboon viper.
Yeah.
And I must have jumped a meter up in the air in such a fright. But in that time, I must have put about 8-10 rounds into him. Because, he was at my feet.
Yeah.
And we used to sit in the bush on these boring ops saying, imagine if these guys were Viet Cong. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this guy, he was at my feet, and he didn't have his clothes on, and that black skin with the leaves was camouflaged like you've never seen.
Shit, a break.
But the trail of clothing led to him. But my focus was in front, and when I looked down, boy, no, I should be dead.
I've seen a few guys with soiled pants, from frights like that.
No, I must have left at least half a meter up. just up. Whoa! I got such a fright up, but I pumped him. I did
a little joint thing with the SAS, a very small thing, but I won't mention the guy's name. But he stepped over a log. He was just in front of us, and the two was lying behind the log, and he just shot like that straight through the guy's leg, But
wow.
He was turned into mincemeat, but he stained his pants. He shat.
Yeah, is it? Okay, yeah. No. Luckily, I've always had a very strong sphincter. It was from getting duped by Jardine every week.
Yeah, Jardine. Man, I've got a few cuts from him. Yeah, he was. I'll tell you a story about Jardine. Many years after I left Rhodesia and went to South Africa, I was the sales rep for Marley Tiles, and one of my customers was that very posh school for boys up northwest of Pietermaritzburg.
Michael House.
Michael House.
Yeah.
Now, this is a true story, Rob. I went in there and I spoke to the receptionist, and I said, hi, I'm from the rep from Mali. I've come to take your orders if you have any. I didn't mention my name, and I heard this voice come out of the office next door. That voice sounds like a Ballinger. Can you believe that guy must have been the teacher or the headmaster or the deputy head to thousands of and he recognized my name. I just couldn't believe. I was gobsmacked. I said, "Good Lord, Neil, what the heck?"
Tony, I've told many guys the story. I was Form 1 in 71.
Yeah.
And after the first term in assembly, he says, "Right, all the Form 1s, if you come to my office and I don't know your name, I will give you a shilling."
Wow. He's
and
amazing.
He knew everyone's name. Then I left in end of 72, went to Sonoya, thank goodness, because I wouldn't have even passed my COP.
Yeah.
Well, it was RCE in those days. I wouldn't have even passed because we were in B1 at Churchill and we were naughty. So Jardine used to visit my backside once a week. I walk into his office, I said, and he says, yes, Riddell, what have you done now, my boy?
Yeah.
I said, well, sir, he says, yes, I understand. Bend. And then we were playing golf in Joburg in the 2000s. It was a charity day at that Leeuwkop Golf Club, and Neil Jardine was there. I believe he'd become a Buddhist and everything. He was quite spiritual. And I walked out to him on one of those tees, and I felt very strange calling him Neil, but and I just said to him, hello, Neil, how are you doing? And he looked at me for quite a while, and he looked at me and he said, he couldn't get the surname. He said, Robert. And I mean, we're talking in the 2000s, and last time he saw me was 1971.
I'm beginning to remember your reputation at school. The Riddells and who was that other guy? Gray or
there
something?
was Mark Davis was in my class.
Yeah.
And in Form 1, his mate, I can't remember.
To Byra, can't remember his name. Portuguese name, the naughty buggers. But somewhere in there, I vaguely remember your name.
It wasn't Rosie. It wasn't Rosie Delapria.
No, I can't remember. But naughty buggers, man. Sheesh. Yeah.
No, we were, Tony, we were, because I spent my whole from KG1 to Standard 5 in boarding school at Machiki, the tiny little boarding school, because we were raised on a farm at Edlands. And so Form 1 and 2, we were day skis. And boy, oh boy, look, I was smoking then. In Form 1, we were smoking. We were stealing my dad's beers. We were shoplifting, going to the Greek Corner Cafe, climbing into his backyard, handing over empties and walking into his front door and getting the deposits. We were naughty as shit. We didn't use the stairs at my mom's flat. We used to climb up the drain pipes.
Yeah.
So there's all these filthy marks up the walls. We were terrorists. So
I made so much money out of those little Greek shops. My mother had a couple of avocado pear trees in the back garden. The fruit from them were magnificent, 3/4 the size of my head, no string in them. And she would be waiting and waiting and waiting because she used to take them to her friends at the bowling club. And my brother and I said, sod this boy. We went in there one day with about 12 sacks. And we stripped it bare, took it up to the Greek shop and made about $30. And it was a lot of money back then.
Yeah, but, this one we hit was in Belvedere, the Greek at the Belvedere shops there. And he was giving us money for his own bottles. We just scaled out the back.
That's brilliant.
We were naughty shits. My poor mother, I can remember once she had me on the bed. She had this umbrella. She was about to exorcise me. She wanted to get Satan out of me because she nearly impaled me. We were naughty shits. We were bad.
My mom used a leather strap with 2 diamond-shaped brass buckles on it. and after it, no, Dad never touched us. He was a very meek, mild Tommy. But my mom, being a Dutchman, she used to wind us, say my brother and I were walking around with these welts on our back. But
look, I deserved every hiding I got at Churchill because I was in the pipe band as well. So there you being bull brushed and you do all that shit. So you grew up the hard way.
Dave Krieger.
And then he would the one day we got this new Afrikaans teacher and she walked into the class and she only spoke in Afrikaans, no explanation in English. And I turned to the guy next to me. I think it was Brian McKibben was my best mate there. And old, who was the other one? Was old Blaze Thomas. We were all in the same. Remember, Blaze was a Zim motocross champion in the mid-'80s. And I said to one of them, I said, what did she say? And she said, yeah, go to the headmaster. I'm talking in class. I said, I just asked him what you said. I didn't understand your Afrikaans. But she carried on and she sent me down. And I walk into Jardine's office. He says, my boy, what have you done now? And I told him, sir, I was just asking. I didn't understand our teacher in Afrikaans. I just asked him what she said. He says, yes, my boy, I understand. Bend. Now, that's the only hiding I didn't deserve. The rest, oh boy, we were naughty. Look, I was in Scouts in Greendale, 17th Valhalla. And Skip Rogerson was our Scout master. And he was a blue-collar worker. Even his workshop was down by the Cow's Guts, by the railway line. Literally south of the railway line.
Oh, yeah.
That's where Skip was. Even when I was in the army, I used to go and visit him. No, he was like a father figure to us, and he loved us young little reprobates. I don't think I got one badge in Scouts, because while the goody two shoes were all tying knots and doing this and that, us skates, Russell Codd and all of us, we sitting on the roof smoking. This is on the roof of the Scout Hall. No, we were naughty shits.
Do you remember Hambley, the geography teacher?
Yeah, yeah.
He used to carry around a broken javelin stick, and we would fall asleep from the heat often, and he would whack this thing down on, and there was a real naughty little shit, and my memory's terrible. It's not like yours, which is brilliant. And he used to wind Hambley up, and I still got this vision of him chasing him around the desks, and this little guy was heading for the door with Hambley after him, big stocky guy, and he took one.
I remember he had black hair. He was very stout with black hair.
That's right, and he took a massive kick at this guy, but he dodged out the way. And Hambley's foot got embedded in the hollow core door. Now I don't know, I don't know for how many years after that, when that door was open, people
you could see it.
You could see the hole that was from Hambley's foot.
Well, who was the other one? Mr. Moore, the science teacher.
Moore,
that Yorkshireman,
and
Moore.
that old English teacher, Mr. Slatter. Shit, could he beat?
Yeah, but Moore, he beat me once for saying bung. I asked for a rubber bung. It's not a bung, it's a boom. So but he lashed me because I didn't say boom. Look, I mean, we were so freaking naughty though.
Yeah.
But even at Scouts, and his two sons, Rhodesians, they were both Air Force. They were in the Air Force. I can't remember what squadrons.
We used to terrorize the borders, us day scholars, because in the laboratory you always had those bottles with dead animals, and we used to go and then pinch some of the meat out, and when we went away on a rugby game, we would put the dead animal on that, and we would piss into the beer bottles and put the lid back down again. Give it to the borders, and you just have
No, look, we were very high spirited youngsters in those days.
One guy,
we were master shoplifters, and all the old witches at the flats. My mom lived at what were those flats in Belvedere? Francis Flats,
right?
The government flats. And we were such naughty shits that these old women were justified in shouting at us, but we called them the old witches. So we used to go down to Devaris Brothers, and we used to go and shoplift those little smoke pellets for smoking our bees. And then we'd go and lusher them into the old witch's flat. We were terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. We got lashed.
This one guy, he used to pinch everything out of the science labs in those bottles. There was this long silver stick, and he said, I'm going to take some of that. He didn't know what it was. So he lifted the lid up. It was water or paraffin it was in or something. And he cut off a big chunk and he stuck it in his pocket. Well, it was white phos. And then it ignited and he burnt a huge hole.
As soon as it gets air.
Yeah, it burnt a huge hole in his leg. He was running down the corridor screaming his head off and had to be hospitalized. But that taught him a lesson. Memories like that are just so... precious.
We were a different generation, and Rhodesians were, even in my chats with old Zach, this US Army Ranger captain, he keeps on saying, let us come, they will come here and they'll help us take back Rhodesia.
Really? Wow.
But I mean, he just can't believe when I tell him the way we were raised and how we were in the army. I said, the army was no different from boarding school.
Yeah.
It was just a lot more swearing. And we had weapons, which was what we wanted.
Yeah, and you could legally kill people.
Yeah. So we were, Tony, and I tell people we were privileged to be raised there during that time in history.
I've traveled the world, and I can honestly say, not because I'm biased, that there are no finer people I've ever met anywhere. Just totally unique and different. There's one criticism I've got of Rhodesians is that they can be a little bit cliquey occasionally and a little bit bitchy.
Yeah, especially the woman.
Oh, shit.
I got divorced in about 94. So my kids were back there. So I was up and down the whole time, taking my son to cricket and that. And I went with my dad. We went to play at Karoi. But all the government schools were Montified. So what is that college? Sonoya was Lomagandi College. And then the one at Karoi was some other. But anyway, I was there one day, And these rich, that's before Bob targeted the white farmers. So the farmers had all become mega wealthy. You know, they inherited their parents' farms, and they just were now proper commercial farmers. And they were mega bucks. They had the latest Land Cruisers, the latest boats, the latest outboard motors. And I was at riding school. Ridings. That's just on the Makuti side of Peroya. And we're playing there, and I listened to all these women. They were bitches of the highest order.
Yeah.
They were unbelievable. The stuff you'd see on what are these Real Housewives of this and that.
Yeah, Dallas. Yeah.
They were absolute bitches. And they weren't Rhodesians. They were Zimbabweans now. And I tell you, remember Rhodesia, a handshake was a written contract.
Yeah.
No one, I don't recall anyone reneging on a handshake. But no, the Zimbabweans changed. It was every man for himself. And I discovered as well, I think I explained the amount of barrack room lawyers in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
They're shouting it from the rooftops because
everybody was right.
Captured audience there who are half inebriated.
Yeah, everybody was right. Yeah, that bond, that glue from the wall evaporated very quickly.
Yeah, that was gone. Even 89, 99, 91, I went up for the 3 kitfits in a row. And one of the mates we're fishing with at Kariba, I wanted to do an oil change on my Land Rover. So he said, come and see me back in Harare. He's in Masasa. And I went there. He screwed me like you can't believe, with a smile on his face.
Terrible.
The price, his markups were like 400-500% of what I would pay here. And you can try and justify it. It was just absolute ripple. But he did it with a smile on his face. And I bitched to old Brian Wilson. Brian was that armorer, used to extend our AK stocks. And Brian says, no, well, that's what it's like. But I mean, he was obviously like that. He made million. He became a millionaire out of steel. Then he buggered off to Aussie very quickly. His kids went to school there. And then after a number of years, he came back and he took over his business, which he'd sold on because the guy running it had ground it into the dirt, and he's restarted. And he's been back in Zim a decade. His son's back from Aussie with an Aussie wife. They love life in Zim. She's got 3 cars, about 4 servants. No, they love it. The guys with money in Zim live much better than we do here in SA.
Well, when I was running my construction company, a farmer by the name of Nichols out from north of, where the hell was it? North. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, they were the big wheat farmers that Mugabe targeted.
Wow, you wanted to see that farm that I worked on? It was unbelievable. There was center pivots off to the horizon. They had these huge towers where the grain was put in, and their own trucks went underneath. They had 18
silos.
It was, and the house I built for them was mouth-wateringly beautiful. And that was taken away in 2 hours, I believe.
He targeted them. He actually mentioned them in Parliament. The Nichols, they were the wheat suppliers for Zimbabwe. The bread for Zimbabwe was grown by the Nichols family.
You went through this little animal grid and you came to this little rise, and it was just wheat right to the horizon. It was something else, to tell you.
Yeah, it's Banket Chinoi, that area.
Huge number of farms, and hell of a nice guy. And I made quite a bit of money building that house, but it was magnificent.
No, even Roger McDonald, who was in the squadron, we were big mates. He started in the 90s. He formed Plastic Industries. He bought an old plastic extrusion business, and he turned it into a mega business called Plastic Industries. And then he sold it on. I stayed with him in November. He's mega bucks, like you cannot believe. But during the panic in 2008 to 10, when they're taking all the farms, people were panicking. Roger bought half of Masasa industrial sites for, he said, I think 25 cents or 30 cents on the dollar. That's what Roger paid. And now he rakes in mega bucks just from rentals. But his son runs that now. No, Roger's, even now, he's leaving tomorrow for Wangi for 6 days.
Oh, man.
And if he's not jetting around the world, he's there in that. But no, Roger's done well. He's done so well. But then you get the other extremes, my brothers who scratching like chickens in the dirt.
I know. There's a lot of them, unfortunately. But
well, even my brother Ian, who's the middle brother, he's a safari guide. He's got no work. He's got no income.
Terrible.
And he lives in a cottage in Greendale with this old deer, and he's worried that she's about to sort of clock out. And once he does, Ian doesn't have money to do squat. No, he was a bushman. He was BSAP. Then after the war, he was National Parks. And then he left that and he worked for Shearwater canoes, safaris, but he had to stop that because of his back. He couldn't sit in the canoe. Then he became one of the best, if not, like my late dad said, the best ornithologist in Zimbabwe. But he's a bushman. He can't communicate with people. Even his loyal customers have abandoned him because he doesn't pass over the information. You have to drag it out of him. But he was always like that.
Terrible, man.
But the knowledge that Ian's got up in his head about, and it's not only birds, it's the trees, grasses, everything. Boy, that guy's knowledge, but he doesn't know how to dispense that knowledge properly.
All right, Rob. Take care.
Okay.
Eh? All right.
All right, Tony. Thanks.
All
Bye.
the best. All the best. Bye.